Hi, welcome to Chapter Book Storytime. I'm Ellen from EVPL Oakland, and on today's edition of the Variety Pack, I have a new favorite book to read to you today. I'm just so excited about it. I really loved it when I read it, and it's by one of my favorite authors. It's called Liva at Last by Sara Pennypacker, and the illustrations have been drawn by Matthew Cordell. Do you recognize her name? Well, maybe you recognize some of her books. She wrote a series about a little girl named Clementine. Clementine is a funny girl. She is a lot of fun to read about. That's a great series. Sara Pennypacker won some awards for her book Pax. And then there's a sequel to that one called Pax Journey Home. Those are also wonderful books. But I'm really excited she's written a new book. And so let's find out about Liva at last. Chapter 1. At first. Leeva Thornblossom flew outside the instant she heard the Nutsmore weekly thunk against the door. Fetching the newspaper was the only time her parents permitted her in the front yard. Ignoring the paper, she jumped off the step and waded through the weeds to the towering hedge that surrounded her yard. There she knelt and cautiously worked her hands into the sharp-needled branches to open a sight line. Whoever delivered the paper was long gone, as always, but her eyes swept the sidewalk and, yes, she was in luck today, a woman gripping a little boy by the hand, approaching from the right. Liva scarcely blinked as they drew near. First she would call out a bright, hello, and then when the woman located her in the hedge, she'd add, well, this was the hard part. What Liva had always ached to say to someone was, I am here. And you are here. But somehow those words seemed too important to call through a hedge. Besides, what would she say next? Just as the woman reached the edge of Liva's yard, she scooped up the toddler and crossed the street. Again? Why did people always do this, as if avoiding an invisible barbed wire fence? Crestfallen, Liva watched the woman hurry past on the far sidewalk, the little boy jouncing on her hip, until she was out of sight. Better luck next week, she told herself as she plodded back to pick up the paper. There on the steps, she flipped through it, looking for the Improve Your Vocabulary column filler. There was never any actual news in the paper, but a new word, complete with definition, every week. At least she had that. Before she found it, though, a headline caught her eye. And reader, for the first time ever, Liva saw actual news. Nutsmore announces opening day of school for children 6 and older. Well, she practically toppled over into the doorway briars in her shock. Her town had built a school. And since she was somewhere between 8 and 9, not knowing her birthday, she had never been able to calculate her age exactly, she would be going to school. At last, it was out into the world for her in only, she checked the announcement, 5 weeks and 3 days. She would tell her parents after dinner when they were in the least rotten of the moods they simmered in all day. Wait, that's silly, she chided herself out loud as she ducked through the briars and went inside. Her mother was Nutsmore's mayor, and her father was its treasurer. Surely they already knew about this new school. Then why hadn't they told her? Was it possible they were planning to surprise her? On the soap opera she watched, The Winds of Our Tides, the Cleverton family always made a big deal of revealing joyous news to their twin daughters. For you, darlings, ta-da! Granted, this kind of parent-like behavior was wholly unlike her own mother and father, but there was a first time for everything. It was hard to wait for them to get back from work. Liva solved the bookkeeping problem her father had left for her and signed it with a flourish. She sharpened the toes of her mother's shoes and rushed through the rest of her regular duties. Then she threw herself into the exercises on vim and vigor at any age, with extra vim and vigor, and turned on the winds of our ties with a new warm sense of connection. Those twin Cleverton daughters attended school, and now so would she. School! Finally out into the world! She sank down cross-legged with the newspaper. Before turning to stare at the miraculous announcement again, she hunted down the Improve Your Vocabulary word. Deluxe. Notably luxurious or sumptuous. of a superior kind. The word was good enough to produce a tingle, which only happened with the best of them. When her parents' car crushed into the driveway at 6:20, she got up. Gazing into the refrigerator, she heaved a sigh. Didn't a night like this call for a celebratory dinner, maybe even a meal for herself? But no, all she saw now was the same grim stuff she'd seen every day since her parents had decreed her big enough to prepare their food. She hasn't made us any richer, and she hasn't made us any more famous. She might as well serve us our meals, had been their exact words. Reader, let's pause for a moment and have a look inside this fridge to see what caused her deep sighs. Food in the Thornblossom household fell into two categories, neither of which could be labeled deluxe. Leva's father bought only from the cheapo depot grocery warehouse and only what was moldering on the rock-bottom sale shelf. Mostly, this was cheese-a-roni. Cheese-a-roni bore a glancing resemblance to macaroni and cheese, except that the macaroni and the cheese were indistinguishable from each other, and they were both indistinguishable from the box. So that even when you followed the instructions perfectly, what you ended up with was a flavorless, cardboardy mash that smelled powerfully of feet. Once a month, Mr. Thornblossom and Liva baked up dozens of these food bricks, thereby reducing the cost of turning on the oven, and stacked them on his side of the fridge. He ate them night and day. The items on her mother's side were quite different. Celebrities This Week magazine was filled with famous people dining on trendy dishes, and Mrs. Thornblossom purchased them all. Last week, an actor had been spotted in a restaurant smacking his lips over an eel custard with boar's knuckle jelly, and so that's what Liva was sighing about right now. Ugh. She managed to subsist on leftovers from her parents' meals, but she was hungry all the time. She was hungry now, and she would be just as hungry when she fell into bed. She prepared her parents' plates and brought them into the living room right on time at exactly 6:40. Two television sets blared across the room. Leva's father was turned to money talks, tapping the figures that flashed across the screen into his calculator. Her mother stared hang-jawed at Celebrities Tonight. Liva set the plates on the trays in front of them, crawling on her hands and knees so as not to disturb their viewing, and then sat on her stool in the corner to wait. And here's a picture of that scene. Reader, we'll take a break here, too. Regrettably, you have to meet Leva's parents. Well, I'm going to skip the chapter where we meet Leva's parents. I think you'll get an idea in the chapter after that what her parents are like. So we're going to skip chapter 2, and we're going to move on to chapter 3, Lying Liars Lie. Once her parents had finished their dinners, Liva positioned herself where she could address them both and cleared her throat. Mother, Father, do you have some news to tell me? She stretched out her arms to welcome their surprise. Leva's mother, staring at her television set from her throne-like chair, commented on how notable Taffy Glamoux's new hairdo was. Leva's father, in his recliner, jabbed his calculator keys at a determined clip. Liva felt her arms drop a little bit. I'm ready for your news, she tried again. Leva's father hunched closer over his calculator, muttering. Her mother turned up the volume on her set. Leva's arms gave up. She looked down at her hands, their nails bitten as neatly as she could manage. At the brown braid she'd carefully finger-combed falling over her faded yellow dress. After years of comparing herself to the child stars in her mother's magazines and to the twins of The Winds of Our Tides, she knew what a disappointment she was. Still, she did exist. How then could her parents act as if they didn't see her or hear her? It was a question she asked herself every time she tried to talk with them. Tonight, with their exciting news hanging in the air, it was especially vexing. Liva tried one more time. Isn't Nutsmore getting something wonderful? Her mother finally looked up. She blew a quick kiss at her reflection in the mirror and then nodded. Oh, yes, that. I don't know how you found out, but yes. Oh, thank you, I'm so excited, Liva cried, exactly the way the twin Cleverton girls greeted all their surprises. Oh, you should be excited, Mayor Thornblossom agreed. Everyone will be. Mr. Thornblossom cast a suspicious glance over at his wife. I've commissioned a statue of myself, she told him. At his look of alarm, she flapped calm down hands and added, paid for by the townspeople, of course. What? Liva said. But that isn't. It's a well-known fact that statues are of famous people, and famous people have statues. No, I was talking about 50 feet tall. I've hired a separate sculptor for shoes, gold-plated 5 feet high at the heels. Liva shuddered. Life-size, her mother's shoes were alarming enough. But I meant this, she said, presenting the newspaper. Nutsmore has a school now, and I'm going. You're not going, Mayor Thornblossom said with breathtaking finality. She had a lot of practice decreeing that people couldn't do things, and it showed. But it says here, all children 6 and older are expected to attend grades 1 through 12 in 5 weeks and 3 days. Mr. Thornblossom dropped his calculator. He stroked his mustache. 6, 1, 12, 5, 3. Those are numbers. Numbers are essential for counting money. That's true, Dolt, Liva's mother agreed. She began to tap a stilettoed heel. Clink, clink, clink. But Liva's not going, she repeated even more firmly. She already knows numbers. You remember, she works for you. This was true. One evening, 3 years before, her father had been stewing away trying to solve a simple 3% dividend yield out loud when Liva had grown impatient and supplied the answer. Since then, Mr. Thornblossom did his own adding and subtracting. He could handle those with his calculator, but anything more difficult he turned over to Liva, and each morning he left her a bookkeeping problem to solve. But I want to go, Liva cried. Her father picked up his calculator. Her mother zeroed in on Famous in a Flash, the final segment of Celebrities Tonight, during which an ordinary person was plucked from obscurity and given a 10-year contract to live in Hollywood as a reality star. Wait, Liva looked from one parent to the other. You weren't surprised that there was a school. You already knew. Why didn't you tell me? Her parents shrugged at each other. Why should we? The shrug seemed to say. How long? Liva's voice quavered. For how long has there been a school in Nutsmore? More shrugging. Since always. Big deal. Who cares? But you always said that schools were only in soap operas, that real towns didn't have them. Liva staggered backward as the truth struck her like a bowling ball to the chest. Her parents had lied to her. Now, reader, Liva had known her mother and father were liars, of course. According to the stories they told each other at night, lying was pretty much all they did in their jobs. It was how they'd gotten their jobs, in fact. Vote for us. We promise this, we promise that. But it never occurred to her that they would lie to her, their own daughter. Learning that you cannot trust the people you've relied on is devastating. Like discovering that what you thought was a solid earth below your feet was actually a nest of spider bones. Liva was shaken to her core. But at the same time, like a rabbit sensing a wolf, she felt all of her senses quicken. Her eyes and ears crackled with new acuity. Her skin began to sizzle as if electrified. From this moment on, she realized she must be extremely cautious around these two liars. She must sharpen her wits and be prepared to act with boldness and laser-like speed. Chapter 4. The Question. Liva took a step away from her parents. Why? She asked coolly. If you knew there was a school, Why haven't you ever sent me?" Her mother scowled. "Oh, school teaches those subjects. Human inanities, music, la-di-da, literature, schmiterature, poetry, schmoetry, art. All that nonsense." "Nonsense," her father parroted. "You only need to learn numbers, so you can make us money." "She knows her numbers, dolt," her mother reminded him again. "But yes, money is important. Money can get you fame." She gave her husband a sly wink. "And fame can get you money." Liva thought of the locked bedroom door directly above them. The shoeboxes came in, but they never went out. "But what is the money for? What are you going to do with it?" "Do with it?" Mr. Thornblossom's brow furrowed. "If I do something with it, I won't have it." "But if you don't do anything with it, it's only greenish paper in a box. I don't understand why you want it." "Well, that's because you're not a genius like me," he said, tapping his forehead. Just then, both television programs ended. Liva had only a few moments of her parents' attention before the next one began. She drew herself up to her full height. "I don't care that they only teach those human inanities. I want to go to a school and be with other people." "People?" her parents shrieked at once. "You think people are more important than money and fame?" her mother demanded. "You ask what money is for," her father cried. "Well then, what are people for?" "Ha! Answer that!" His eyes gleamed in triumph, as if it had been quite an accomplishment turning her own question around on Liva. "People are for being famous too," Mrs. Thornblossom declared. "Obviously, you can't be famous without people." Mr. Thornblossom added one of his rare thoughts. "And to get money from. That's all they're for." Liva felt certain that people were for more important things than getting money from, and being famous too. Why else would the characters on The Winds of Our Tides be so desperate to reach other characters? Episode after episode, they burst into rooms, careened through towns, and flew across continents in search of other people. But why did they do all that? What were people for? The question felt important. It felt like the most important question ever asked. "You can't go," her mother barked, dragging Liva back from her thoughts. "Check your employee manual." And she shot a sharp look at her husband. For a long moment, Mr. Thornblossom seemed confused. Oh, but then he withdrew Liva's employee manual and a pen from the pocket of his recliner. He scribbled in the manual and then held it out. "No going to school. It's right here under workplace location restrictions. No leaving." Liva's newly sharpened wits reminded her of something. "But there's an exception for making money or getting famous." Her mother shook her head so hard her hair tower snapped. "Yes, but children don't get famous or rich for going to school." She motioned toward the manual. "No school. Read it." Liva didn't take the manual. She knew perfectly well what her father had done, and she knew that it was unfair. Whenever she encountered unfairness, it felt as if something in her chest were leaping to its feet, trying to punch its way out. That something was rising up now, but Liva told it to sit back down. She needed an idea. She retreated to her thinking spot in the kitchen. Much later, after she'd gotten herself ready for bed and tucked herself in, she lay wide awake thinking about the evening. What came back to her again and again was her father's question. What are people for? The question galvanized her already crackling curiosity. The answer, she felt, was out there. The problem was, she was in here. Well, that would have to change tomorrow. Chapter 5, Beyond the Hedge. The building beside Liva's house was 3 stories tall, made of rosy red brick. From her bedroom window, when the lights were on in this building, she'd often see people inside. She'd start there. The instant her parents left the next morning, a Saturday, no matter, they worked 7 days a week. She bolted out the kitchen door. Liva had been in the backyard before, of course. It was her job to mow its weeds. page 6 of the manual, Workplace Duties. But today she marched straight to the tall, prickly hedge, the boundary her manual warned she must never cross. Before she could talk herself out of it, she straightened her spine, raised her fists, and crashed in. The first thing she noticed was the piney, fresh scent. How had she lived between 8 and 9 whole years without knowing how thrilling it smelled to push through a boundary? That scent was worth all the scratches. She filled her lungs with it and pushed on through. Liva emerged beside a large red metal container printed with the words, "Book Return." In front of her lay a paved drive. The drive ran along the side of the rosy brick building and was painted down its center with instructive yellow arrows. She stepped out and followed the arrows to the back of the building, where she passed a stoop. Still following the arrows, she rounded another corner. Seeing that the drive only led through a parking lot and then out to the street, Liva retraced her steps. There had been a door into the rosy brick building on the back stoop. She climbed up, walked past pots of herbs, a chair, and a table, and opened the door. She found herself in a tiny hallway crowded with boxes, umbrellas, skateboards, gloves, and helmets. Past this clutter, though, was a single, spacious, bright room, more appealing than any she'd ever seen, even in The Winds of Our Lives. Liva hid behind a huge picture frame draped in a canvas and took it all in for a moment. Sun streamed through the windows, whose deep sills were filled with cushions and cheerful scarlet geraniums. Plump chairs and colorful rugs were scattered everywhere. Directly across, double doors stood wide open to the street, as if in welcome. Best of all, books and books and books lined every wall and filled tall shelves in the middle of the room. Liva had long been curious about books. The people in The Winds of Our Tides had lots of them in their homes, and they seemed proud of them, although no one ever did anything with them, except the children, who read them in their beds. And Liva had often seen books displayed behind celebrities on her mother's programs, but she'd never seen anything like the abundance in front of her. If she were ever to need her picture taken, this certainly would be the place. That wasn't what she needed today, though. Liva stepped out and walked up to the only other person in the place, a sad-faced youngish man seated behind a desk. He was reading one of the books, so apparently grown-ups did that as well. "I have a question," she asked. The sad-faced youngish man straightened up. He tightened the knot of his tie. "Well, a library is a good place to find answers." "Library?" asked Liva, who had never seen the front of the building with its large sign that read, "Nutsmore Public Library." "Your first visit?" the sad-faced youngish man. Or maybe he was an oldish boy. It can be hard to tell when someone's wearing a tie. Closed his book and really looked at Liva. Being really looked at was a new experience, and it made Liva feel more solid somehow. "My first visit," she said. "Library." He spread his arms. "A place full of books you can read here or take home for a while." Liva gasped. "Oh, you would let me read your books?" "Not my books, yours." Liva gasped again. "Oh, my books?" "Your books. This is a public library." He tapped a nameplate. It read Pauline Flowers, but Pauline had been crossed out and Harry had been handwritten over it. "I'm Harry. I'm a librarian here. Well, actually, it's only as long as my aunt can't—" A look flashed over Harry Flower's face. That was not simple sadness. It was outright misery. "You don't like being a librarian?" "Oh, no, I do," he protested. "Although, I'm sorry that I have to be one. I mean, I'm happy I can do it, just—" Here he flung himself over the desk as if he couldn't go on. But then he raised his head and waved toward the nearest armchair. "Oh, I might as well tell you the whole story. It turns out that Harry is the acting librarian. He's filling in for his aunt, Pauline Flowers, who has bad knees. She's injured her knees in a skateboarding accident, and so she is up in the apartment that they have above the library, and she can't come downstairs because her knees are recovering. So he has to be a librarian until Aunt Pauline can come down the stairs on her own." Harry shows Liva around the library. "Here on the first floor is the fiction, stories. Then he led Liva up a spiral staircase. The staircase was missing several chunks of railing, some banisters, and a number of treads. Liva dodged nimbly around the broken parts, which made it more fun. Up here are the informational texts, he said when they reached the second floor. Non-fiction. The second floor was as inviting as the first. Liva wanted to explore it, but Harry took a step down. Liva didn't move. She sniffed deeply. What's that? Oh, cookies. Oatmeal apricot today. My aunt and I live on the top floor. And he took another step down. Liva couldn't move, though. It was as though her nose had hypnotized her legs. She had never smelled anything so wonderful before. Cookies? It's a life goal of hers, to make every cookie recipe in the world. Now that she can't do her job, it's become even more important. I almost forgot. You had a question. Yes, I want to find out, what are people for? Harry Flowers reacted with a look full of such complex emotion that even Liva couldn't read it. People? What are they for? He repeated. Yes, what is the point of people, please, Harry? What good are they? Harry dropped his chin to his hands and studied Liva hard. He looked so worried that she leaned in and gave him a pat on his shoulder. She'd never given anyone a shoulder pat before, and she'd certainly never received one, but she knew from her soap opera that it was a comforting thing to do. The pat did it. Harry shook off his worried look. He rubbed his fingers through his hair, which was so tightly curled it looked as if it could spring off his head at any moment. He studied her even harder. Finally, he asked, "Can you read?" Of course, Liva had taught herself to read years before, and she told him so. He drew out a chart titled Determining Reading Level. Starting at the top, read the sentences aloud until you get to one that you can't. Liva did this for a while, but since the sentences were all about someone named Nancy, who never did anything interesting at all, she soon grew bored. She picked up the acting librarian's book instead. "This above all, to thine own self be true," she read, "and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." Harry stared across the desk at her. Liva recognized his expression as stunned happiness. "Hamlet by William Shakespeare," he said. "I guess you can read just fine. How much can you carry?" "Oh, I don't know. I exercise with vim and vigor at any age every day, so I'm pretty strong. All right, say 10 books. Let's go find some." "Wait. No," he interrupted himself. His eyes darted up toward the ceiling, and he broke into a smile. Small, but real. He held up one finger as if asking Liva to stay where she was, which she would have done anyway. She loved this place. And then he rose from his desk, spiraled up the staircase to the third floor, and disappeared. Liva heard a faint murmuring of voices. Then a few moments later, Harry came back down, holding a sheet of paper. He circled the library, consulting the paper and picking books off the shelves. He returned and stacked the books into her arms. "My aunt feels that these books will give you a good start on learning what people are for. Read them, then come back, and we'll give you 10 more. Liva couldn't believe her luck. 10 books, all for her. She hurried for the door, but just as she got there, Harry called, "Wait!" Liva pulled the books closer to her chest. Reader, now that she had them, she wasn't going to give them up easily. "Come back," he repeated. "From now on, come in the afternoons. We open back up at 1 o'clock each day." The next day, Liva goes back to the library, sneaking through the hedge, and returns her books that she's read and gets 10 more. And then Harry says, "Here, this is from Aunt Pauline. Chocolate chunk with hazelnuts today." Harry stacked 10 new books into Liva's arms, balanced the cookies on top, and Liva went back to the house and ate the cookies slowly and read the books quickly. Each afternoon for the rest of the week, she returned. Sometimes there were other people in the library. Liva greeted them, "Hello," and they greeted her, "Hello" back, which made her feel as if they were on the same team, the team of people who visited the library. And by the way, reader, there had not once been so much as a cookie crumb at the Thornblossom home. So you can imagine how those cookies brightened Leva's life. More importantly, 10 books for 7 days is 70 books. And books, Leeva found out, did a whole lot more than merely look good as backgrounds in photographs. Reader, here are some of her favorites. Have you read any of these? New Kid, Charlotte's Web, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, Bud, Not Buddy, Other Words for Home, One Crazy Summer, Because of Winn-Dixie, 10 books and 3 cookies each day. After a week like that, Leeva felt ready. Chapter 8, The Punishment. I want to go to school and be with people, Leeva plunged in after dinner. People are not just for getting money from and being famous too. People are for helping you find your dog who's afraid of lightning and for eating pickles with. They are for saving your life if you're going to be killed just because you're a runt. For pretending to be a family of a hungry runaway boy so he can get a meal. People keep you from feeling lonely or scared or... Where did you get that malarkey? Her mother asked. I read 70 books. The people in those books... Books? People in books don't have money, her father laughed. He tapped the side of his head as if he was about to impart something very wise. So they aren't real. They're just printed words on paper. Leeva realized that her father was both right and wrong. He was right that if you opened up a book, you would see printed words, not real people. But he was also wrong because now Leeva knew that as you read a book, those words became real people, doing real things. By the end of the book, those words left you weeping or cheering or vowing to change your life. Words had true power, Leeva realized. No wonder she searched the Nutsmore Weekly each Friday to learn a new one. Before she could pursue this revelation, her mother snapped off her television. She got up. She began to pace. Clink, clink, clink. Where did you get those 70 books? She demanded, stopping in front of Leeva. Certainly not in this house. Leeva gulped. Then she straightened up. Her parents lied, but she wouldn't. At the library, next door. Her father looked up from his show. Did you get any money there? Money? It's a library. They lend you books. Mayor Thornblossom ducked to her mirror. She gave herself a wink. Am I famous in there? Famous? It's a library, Leeva repeated. Some of the books are famous, I think. Leva's father seemed to lose interest then, but her mother frowned and began to grind her heel. Didn't you talk about me in there? I never said your name, Leeva admitted truthfully. I can't. Her mother's eyes widened, and then they narrowed dangerously. Is that so? She loomed over Leeva. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Well then, you're not to go into that library again. Leeva gasped. The something that lived in her chest, the thing that hated unfairness, raised its fists. But she remembered just in time. She had to be on guard now, more cautious. The scritching was getting sharper, a clear warning sign. If handing out punishments were a sport, her mother would have a neck full of gold medals, and she was just getting warmed up. Who knew what she might do next? Leeva told the thing in her chest to settle down for now, fold its hands in its lap. 2 new programs began on the parents' set. Stop talking and go away, her mother said. And Leeva did. She ran up to her room and flung herself on her bed. I should run away, she thought bitterly. Lots of kids in the book she'd read last week had run away. It made their families sorry, all right. It taught them a lesson. Leeva rolled over. Who was she kidding? The kids in those books were brave enough to strike out alone. Was she? And even if she were brave enough to run away, where would she go? So Leva's not allowed to go to the library anymore, but she does find a way around it. She meets Harry for lunch every day at 1 o'clock on the back porch. Chapter 10, Leeva sets out. The next day, while Harry and Leeva are having lunch on the back porch, Leeva kept glancing up at the open window on the 3rd floor. She's still baking, Harry said, noticing, which reminds me of something I forgot yesterday. Each day on my break, I run out for the ingredients she'll need for the next day's recipe. Harry said, "so I'm sorry, but I can't spend the whole hour with you." The last bite of sandwich clogged in Leva's throat. She swallowed. "Could you go at night after the library closes?" "No, not at night. I got a part in a play at the community theater. We rehearse in the evenings." Liva was about to argue that maybe he could give up a little bit of his rehearsal time, but then she saw his face. You didn't need to study soap operas to read his expression as determined passion. "What is it you love so much about acting?" Harry squinted in thought for a moment. "Oh, the stories, of course, but it's the chance to try on other people's lives I like the best, to walk in someone else's path." Harry's words triggered an idea. "Harry, you don't have to go get the ingredients anymore." He raised a hand. "Oh, I do. She's stuck up there. Can't do her job. At least I can make sure she has that." "No, I mean you don't have to. Someone else can walk the path." "Me, Harry," Liva cried. "Every day you tell me what she needs and where to get it, and I'll do it." Harry munched a handful of grapes, frowning, then nodding, frowning, and nodding. "Are you sure?" he said at last. "You'd be encountering a lot of people, Liva, and they won't all be, well, let's say they'll be a mix. Are you ready for that?" Liva sat up taller. What better way could there be for learning what people are for than encountering a mix of them? "I am definitely ready for that." And so she's finally out into the world and she's going to meet people. How exciting. And she does meet lots of people and a badger to find out what happens when she begins to make friends and learns that not too many people in town are happy with Mayor Thornblossom and the treasurer, Father Thornblossom. Find out what happens and how Liva's going to help make the town better. The story is Leeva at Last by Sara Pennypacker with the illustrations by Michael Cordell. This has been Chapter Book Storytime. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like a copy of Leeva at Last, come into the library or give us a call or go online at evpl.org and reserve a copy. Thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.